Hey guys, Jeremy here with the More Earnest Heed, and we're going to be in Genesis chapter 25 today. Genesis chapter 25, and we'll pick up right in verse 1 where the Bible reads, Then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah, and she bare him Zimran, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shuah, and Jokash begat Sheba and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Ashurim, and Letushim, and Leumim. And the sons of Midian, Epop, and Epher, and Hanak, and Ibidah, and Ilda. All these were the children of Keturah. It's going to be one of those chapters, guys. It's going to be one of those chapters. Oh, Keturah. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. But I want you to keep that in mind. Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. Now, why did he give all that he had unto Isaac? Because he was the promised son. And I know that we are so used to, we don't play favorites. But when God tells you he's playing favorites, it's hard not to play favorites. You know what I mean? And we're going to see about these two sons that Isaac ends up having. And it sure looks like God's playing favorites. And honestly, I have no way of sugarcoating it. He just plain is. God has a favorite, and I'm going to prove that to you. And we're going to look into that as the chapter progresses, because that's the theme of this chapter. If I were to say this is the theme of the chapter, it is God plays favorites, especially in this case. Verse 6, But unto the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived eastward into the east country. So it's not like he completely just overlooked everybody else. He wanted them to know they were loved and appreciated. He gave them gifts. They were well taken care of, but he sent them away from his son, and obviously his son, he gave him all that he had. And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 115 years. So it's 175 years. Then Abraham gave up the ghost and died at a good old age, an old man, full of years, and was gathered into his people. Now, what does that mean to be gathered into your people? Gathered into your people. If you go to chapter 35 of the same book, chapter 35 and verse 29. Let me see if I have it right. Yeah, chapter 35, verse 29. 35, 29. Verse 29. It says, And Isaac gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people, being old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. So when he's gathered unto his people, he was with the dead, with his people, where he came from, and when they were buried together with their families. Even us, we have a family plot in Callahan. That is a spot that was picked out for all the members of the family, and I think that unless I know differently, that everybody who dies in this family, my in-laws, everything, are all going to be in that same cemetery. And when we die, we'll be gathered to our people. Those are our people. So, and I know that obviously the Jews did things differently than we do now, but that's what it meant to be gathered to their people. They would be buried and rest where their people rested. And verse 9, it says, And the sons of Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, which was before Mamre. We just read that there. And my wife's trying to call me. Let me end that call because it'll mess up the video. And the field of Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth, where Abraham buried and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt by the well Lahairoi. And these were the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bare unto Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael. Here we go. By their names, according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, and Kedar, and Abdil, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, and Hadar, and Tamma, and Jutur, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael. These are their names by their own towns, by their castles. 12 princes according to their nations. Remember, in Ishmael, out of him would be a great nation, and out of him would be the 12 princes of the Arab nations. And even though, that's not the lineage that God chose to bring about the Messiah, that's still a great civilization and still great even to this day. They occupy so much of the Middle East and have so much territory. They have wealth and oil and riches beyond measure, and they're doing very well for themselves. I don't want you to feel bad for any of the descendants of Ishmael. Even though they weren't favored, as you'll see in this chapter, they were still blessed by God. And these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years, and he gave up the ghost and died and was gathered to his people. So he went and was buried with his own people. And they dwelt from Havilah to Shur, that is before Egypt, as thou goest toward Assyria. And he died in the presence of all his brethren. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Panaram, and the sister of Laban the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife, means he begged or he asked God for his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Now, I made a statement a while ago that said, show me one place in the Bible, I forgot what video I did this on, where some woman who was barren begged God or entreated God for a child, and God did not answer. Every time I've ever seen in the Bible where God entreated and begged God for a child, God opened the womb and they gave the woman what they wanted. I'm not saying God will always do that because that was the thing in the Bible. I just happened to see that as I read my Bible, that there was never a time where God said no. So that I could see anyways, but maybe I'm missing something. And the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived, and the children struggled together within her. So she had twins, and they were fighting, and she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord, like, why are you doing this to me? I'm sure that was pretty hard on the mama, not just the babies in there fighting. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. So there's nations in there. They would go their own ways. You would have the Jewish people, the Hebrews. You'd have the Arabs and the Ishmaelites that would go their separate way. And they would be a great civilization, and the Jews would be a great civilization. But there would be one stronger and one not as strong. And the elder, who would be Esau, would serve the younger, who would be Jacob. Look what it says in verse 24. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel. So as he's coming out of the womb, even babies, obviously not even knowing what they're doing, the symbolism there is just incredible. He's grabbing hold, who would later become known as the deceiver, Jacob the deceiver, grabbing hold of the heel of Esau, trying to take what he got and what was rightfully his. And his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 80 years old. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau, because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And Jacob sawed pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray you, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore his name was called Edom. Obviously being named after what you're going through. But it's crazy that Jacob was a mama's boy. He dwelt in tents. He's a plain man. And Esau would have been the manly man. Hairy, red-faced, hunts, lives in the field. And they couldn't have been 2 different people. Obviously, we know that there was separation and difference between them. But they were different in the way they looked. They were different in their characteristics and their mannerisms. And Jacob said, sell me this day thy birthright, that which was rightfully his when he was born, the heir, the firstborn, the right of the firstborn. There was two things that they would get. They would get a blessing and they would get a birthright for being born. So he had these two things coming to him one day. He had the right of being the firstborn, which you see he's about to sell. And eventually Jacob's not satisfied with that. He goes after that blessing as well. And Jacob said, sell me this day thy birthright. And Esau said, behold, I am at the point to die. What profit shall this birthright do to me? So he comes out from the field. He's about to die. He's faint. He has, Jacob has made red pottage. So he's asking for this lentil soup and ask him to feed him. And in exchange, Jacob said, sure, I'll give it to you, but I want you to sell me my birthright. And he says, well, what good is it going to do me if I die? Sure, you can have the birthright. Give me the pottage. And Jacob said, swear to me this day. And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. So that which would have been promised was rightfully Esau's, but he sold it away over soup. Sold it for soup. And Jacob said, swear to me this day, and he swore unto him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils. He did eat and drink and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. He's like, who needs that? Like, I did what I had to do to live, basically. But there was something much more important that he gave up that he didn't even realize, and it's about to get much more worse for him. Go over to Romans chapter 9, and let's look at these two guys, Esau and Jacob. Jacob and Esau. Romans chapter 9. Romans chapter 9, look at verse 13. The Bible reads, actually, let's look at verse 12. And it was said unto her, the elder shall serve. Let's back up a little. Verse 10. And not only this, but when Rebekah also had conceived by one, even our father Isaac, for the children having not yet been born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to the election stand, not of works, but of him that calleth. So before they were even born, as these nations quarreled in the room, God had his purpose already outlined. Of course, God didn't force them into something. We're not Calvinists. We don't believe that God willed them against their own will. But God, in his foreknowledge, knew that these would be two great nations, and one would be a deceiver, and one would sell out his birthright. And he knew what was going to happen before it even happened. And it says in verse 12, and it was said of her, the elder shall serve the younger. And that was already prophesied. God prophesied it to Rebekah before she gave birth. As it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. What shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? God forbid. What a crazy verse. It says, Jacob have I loved. This is God talking. Esau have I hated. I always used to hear people say, well, God loves everyone. Jesus loves everyone. Everyone's the same. That's actually not true, because it's hard to discount that verse. Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. And then the very next verse says, is there unrighteousness with God? Is there something wrong with God because he says, Jacob have I loved and Esau have I hated? So there's two different ways of looking at this. And we're not just seeing that God singled out Esau and said, well, I just hate him. What it is the future. It's a future showing favor. That word, I love this, is I'm showing favor to one and not the other. Okay. And you can see that the nation of Jacob, which would later be Israel, and the Jewish people, God had favor towards them, and the Ishmaelites and all and those Arab nations, God did not show favor to. Now, it doesn't mean they couldn't be saved. It doesn't mean that they couldn't be believers and everything. Many saved people. It had nothing to do with that. It's not that God cursed the whole nation or made them lost people or whatever, but he showed favor to one and not the other. Look over at Malachi chapter 1. Let's look at why. Malachi chapter 1. Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. Some strong words, huh? People don't like to use those words, but the Bible uses them, so it's not wrong if we use them too. Malachi chapter 1, let's look at verse 1. The burden of the Lord came to Israel by Malachi. I have loved you, saith the Lord. Yet ye say, wherein hast thou loved us? Israel's like, yeah, show us, prove us. What do you mean you loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother, saith the Lord? Yet I loved Jacob, and I hated Esau. Watch this, comma, and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. Dragons of the wilderness. Whereas Edom, remember the other name for Esau was Edom, because he was red, the nation of the Edomites who God hated, not the individual Esau. So we have a little bit more clarity here. In Romans chapter 9, it says, Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. But when it's speaking of Esau and why he hated Esau, he mentions Edom and that nation of the Edomites. We are impoverished, but we return and build the desolate places, saith the Lord of hosts. They shall build, but I will throw down. They shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. You know, and that's the thing. This wasn't even in Esau's lifetime, where it says, I hated Esau and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. So it's not just speaking of the individual, but it's speaking of the nations that would proceed out of him. That's what God was saying that he hated or did not show favor to, showing a contrast of the favor to Jacob and not to Esau. So we need to read like kind of more scripture, line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, and that's where we get our understanding of the scriptures, because it's easy to just take one thing out of context. A Calvinist can jump on that and say, oh, see, he just chose to hate one, he chose to hate the other, he destined one for hell, he destined one for heaven, and that's not what this context is saying here. It's speaking of the nation of the Edomites. So I know this is a short one. This is only actually 16 minutes long, but this story is going to progress. This is just the beginning of the story of two nations coming out, and Esau selling his birthright for a pot of lentils. So we're going to see in the next chapter, he's also going to sell his birthright. Now he's going to sell his blessing, and he's going to lose all that having that right of being firstborn is, and he's going to regret it, and that puts a division between the two brothers and starts this process of the two nations going their own separate ways. Thank you guys so much. We'll talk to you soon.